Have you ever been told, straight to your face, that your job is to be quiet? I have. My name's Lenora Vance, and I spent most of my life doing everything to keep my family whole, until one dinner, one sentence, and one too confident smile shattered that illusion. Funny how a single moment can flip everything you thought you knew. Before we dive in, let me know, what time are you listening to this, and where are you? Drop a comment below, I'd love to hear from you. I remember it clearly. It was a Thursday, light rain brushing the windshield as I pulled into their driveway in Northgate. The kind of soft drizzle that doesn't soak you right away, just enough to feel cold in your bones. I had the lasagna with me, wrapped in foil, still warm. Same recipe Colin always liked when he was 12, extra mozzarella on top, browned just right. Their house looked the same as always. Spotless, with trimmed hedges and a welcome mat that said, "Good vibes only," in loopy font. I stood there a moment before ringing the bell, thinking how strange it felt that I always had to wait for them to open the door now. There used to be a time Colin would run out to the car before I even turned off the engine. Mary Beth opened the door. She wore one of her neutral sweaters, hair pinned perfectly, a phone still in her hand. "Oh. You're early," she said, not unkindly, but not warm either. "I brought dinner," I said, lifting the pan. She didn't take it from me. "Sure. Just set it in the kitchen." Colin came in a few minutes later, wearing that navy blue zip-up he always wears when he doesn't know what else to put on. He gave me a quick hug, distracted, already scrolling on his phone. "Hey, Mom." It wasn't unfriendly. But it wasn't present. Like hugging someone who already had one foot out the door. I placed the lasagna on the table, even set out plates. We didn't say grace, nobody did anymore. Mary Beth poured wine for herself and Colin, none for me. I didn't ask. They talked a little about their work, Colin's project deadline, Mary Beth's exhausting meeting with the state commission. She said it like I should know what that meant. I nodded politely, took a few bites, though no one seemed interested in the food. My lasagna sat untouched. Then Mary Beth cleared her throat. "So," she started, setting her glass down, "we wanted to talk to you about something. It's not urgent, but it's better to plan early." I glanced at Colin. He was looking at his phone again. Mary Beth continued, her tone light like she was discussing the weather. "Have you thought about doing a financial transfer now, instead of waiting until, well, later? It might make things easier. For tax purposes." I tilted my head. "What kind of transfer?" "You know," she said, tucking her hair behind her ear. "The house. Your account details. It would streamline the inheritance process. We'd manage it for you, you wouldn't have to worry." I set my fork down, slowly. I hadn't really thought about that. "Is something wrong?" No, she said quickly. "It's just, these things are best handled before health becomes a concern. We're just trying to be proactive." I nodded once. Tried to catch Colin's eye. He didn't look up. Then she smiled, tight, professional. The kind of smile people give in courtrooms and charity galas. And she said it. "It's simple, really. Your job is to be quiet and let us handle it. That's what people your age do." It didn't come out cruel. It wasn't shouted or whispered. Just said like a fact. And I sat there, hands folded in my lap, watching the candle flicker in the middle of the table like it was the only thing burning in the whole room. I didn't answer. Didn't raise my voice. I just looked at her, then turned to Colin, hoping, no, expecting, something. A word. A look. Anything. But he just kept his eyes down, cutting into a piece of lasagna he hadn't touched until then. I picked up my wineglass, took a sip, though my mouth had gone dry. Everything else after that felt like it happened underwater. Small talk. Dessert. Goodbyes. They thanked me for the meal as if I were a guest. I don't remember what the lasagna tasted like that night. Couldn't tell you if it was too salty, or dry, or perfect. But I remember her words, so clean, so confident. Like she truly believed my purpose had an expiration date. Like my silence was something I owed them. It was a sentence. Not just in words, but in weight. And in that moment, something inside me, something I didn't know how to switch, clicked on. Not loud. Just clear. That night, as I drove back in the dark with the rain smearing across the windshield, I kept repeating it in my head, over and over. Your job is to be quiet. The drive back to Spokane was quiet. No music, just the sound of the road humming beneath the tires and that sentence looping in my head like a stubborn melody. Your job is to be quiet. I must have repeated it 50 times without meaning to. It clung to me, stuck somewhere between my ribs. When I got home, the house felt colder than usual. I kicked off my shoes, left the lasagna pan in the sink, and sat at the kitchen table without turning on the lights. Outside, the porch lamp flickered like it always did when it got too damp, and I watched it blink against the glass until my eyes stung. I didn't sleep much that night. Mostly I lay there thinking about the first time I met Mary Beth. It was a summer cookout. Colin had brought her home from college. She was polite, careful with her words, and didn't eat much. She complimented the hydrangeas and called my deviled eggs very Midwest. I remember wondering then if she really liked them or if she was just being pleasant. Even after they got married, I kept trying. Inviting them down for Thanksgiving. Offering to watch my grandson when she needed a break. Picking out birthday gifts that I thought were thoughtful, cookbooks, tea sets, once a framed photo of Colin as a toddler with flour on his nose. She never said anything rude. Just cool, distant. The kind of nice that left no warmth behind. I don't think it was ever about me personally. It was about control. Her comfort. Her space. She didn't want me in her world, just orbiting quietly on the edge of it. That Saturday, I went to Baker Street Book Cafe, like I usually do when I need to clear my head. It's a quiet little place tucked between a florist and an old music shop. Smells like cinnamon and worn paper. I've been going there for years. Familiar faces, comfortable chairs, and nobody rushing you out the door. I was halfway through a chapter of an old Maeve Binchy novel when I heard someone say my name. I looked up and saw her, Greta Klein. We'd gone to Whitworth together. She was always the clever one in our group, the one who spoke her mind when the rest of us were still trying to figure out what we felt. Her hair was short now, silver and chic, and she wore a blue wool coat that made her look like someone who'd figured life out. Lenora Vance, she said, grinning, I thought that was you. We hugged awkwardly, neither of us had seen the other in at least 20 years. She sat down across from me with her tea and said I looked thinner than she remembered. Not sick, just worn at the edges, she added gently. We talked for a while. About college, our husbands, our kids, or lack thereof, in her case. Greta had never remarried after her divorce. Said she learned more about herself living alone than she ever did trying to live with someone else. At some point, I must have let more show on my face than I intended, because she tilted her head and said, You look like someone who's just swallowed a truth they didn't ask for. I told her, in vague terms, about the dinner. About Mary Beth. About that sentence. She didn't blink. Just took a long sip of her tea and said, You know, I had a client last year. Sweet woman. Her kids convinced her to rewrite her will after a health scare. Said it would protect the estate. Know what happened? She ended up cut out of her own decisions. Couldn't even sell her car without permission. I frowned. That sounds awful. It is, Greta said. And the thing is, she let it happen because she didn't want to seem difficult. thought being agreeable meant being loved. We sat there for a moment. People passed by the window, bundled in coats and scarves, going about their Saturday errands. The world didn't stop just because mine had paused. Greta reached across the table and touched my hand. Lenora, I mean this kindly, but if you stay quiet for too long, people stop noticing that you ever had a voice. I nodded. Slowly. She stood, pulled her coat tighter, and said, "Come walk with me. I want to show you a spot near the river. No pressure. Just air." As we stepped out into the cold, I felt something loosen in my chest. Like the tiniest part of me had exhaled after holding its breath for too many years. It was raining again the morning I pulled out Roland's old letters. They were in a shoebox tucked beneath a quilt in my linen closet, wrapped in a piece of flannel he used to wear on chilly mornings. The box smelled faintly of cedar and something older, maybe time itself. He'd written to me often, especially when he traveled for work. Not the kind of flowery letters you read in romance novels, but simple, grounded words. Things like, "Don't forget you're the heart of this house," or "I don't make sense when you're not nearby." That sort of love. Steady. Unassuming. Certain. Reading them now made the house feel emptier. Quieter. And it wasn't just because he was gone, it was because I felt myself disappearing, piece by piece, in the spaces where I used to belong. Later that afternoon, I got a text from Colin. No greeting, no "how are you?" Just, "Marybeth can take care of the deed stuff. She knows what she's doing." That was it. A sentence. Like I'd been assigned to a lower tier of relevance. I stared at the screen for a long while, thumb hovering above the reply button, then let it go dark. An hour later, an email came in from Marybeth. It was a PDF attachment labeled, "Suggested Property Strategy, Lenora V." I opened it. Inside were neat bullet points, color-coded charts, and a line item marked "Temporary Transfer of Ownership to Avoid Probate Complications." There was no salutation. No warmth. Just efficient suggestions wrapped in legal ease. She closed the email with, "This is just smart planning. Let us know when you're ready to move forward." I didn't reply. Instead, I stared at the wall for a long while, then picked up the phone and called her directly. She answered quickly. "Hi, Lenora," she said, as if I were a client she hadn't expected to hear from so soon. "I saw the email," I said. "Yes, we figured it might help get things moving before year-end. It's not personal. It's just smart planning. You wouldn't want to burden us later, right?" There it was again. That tone. That gentle shove disguised as helpfulness. I didn't answer. Not because I didn't have words, but because I was afraid of what I'd say if I started. So I just said, "I see," and hung up. That night, I couldn't sleep. Around 10 p.m., I packed a weekend bag, tossed in my toothbrush, some clothes, and a plastic-wrapped pound cake I'd baked the day before. Then I got in the car and drove 3 hours west, straight to Seattle. I didn't call first. I didn't warn them. I just drove. It was almost 1 in the morning when I parked in front of their house. The lights were off, except for the motion sensor by the garage. I didn't ring the bell. I slept in the car, curled up under my coat, too wired to rest properly but too tired to drive back. The next morning, I rang the doorbell at 7:30. Colin answered in sweatpants and confusion. "Mom," he blinked, like I was a ghost. "I was in the neighborhood," I said. Marybeth appeared behind him, already dressed for the day in a navy blouse and crisp slacks. She looked at the suitcase in my hand. "We thought you'd call before coming," she said flatly. "I didn't want to be a burden," I replied. They let me in. I played with my grandson, took out the pound cake, helped make breakfast. Pretended like it was all normal. But something was cracked under the surface. While I was stacking toy blocks with the boy, I overheard Mary Beth in the hallway, on the phone. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried. She said, "She's sweet, but a bit outdated. We'll handle her." My chest tightened. Not anger, just a quiet ache. Like hearing your name in the wrong place. Like realizing the room you're in isn't really yours anymore. I didn't confront her. I didn't ask what she meant. I just folded the towel I'd brought from the guest room, wrote a note thanking them for the tea and time, and let myself out the door before lunch. I drove back in silence, past pine trees and coffee shacks, past the small towns where people still wave from porches. Somewhere along Highway 2, it hit me. That question I hadn't dared ask out loud. Am I still a mother to them? Or have I become a task they're trying to quietly complete? A kindness to manage, like an old utility bill that keeps showing up even after you've moved on? The worst part wasn't the answer. It was realizing I already knew it. The garden had always been Roland's pride. He wasn't a flashy man, but he had a way with the earth, steady, patient. The white chrysanthemums were his favorite. Said they looked clean, honest. That morning, I sat by the flower bed with a cup of lukewarm coffee, staring at the petals trembling in the breeze. They were still blooming, even now, even without him. I ran my fingers along the edge of the old wooden bench, and out of nowhere, I remembered the year Colin got shoved into a locker by two older boys. He came home with a ripped sleeve and red eyes, trying to act like it didn't matter. I marched into that school the next morning and demanded a meeting with the principal. I remember how my voice didn't even shake, how clear I was. Roland waited in the car, and when I got back in, he smiled and said, "You always know when it's time to speak up." That's something I've never had. That memory came back to me like a wave. Back then, I didn't second-guess myself. I didn't worry if I was overstepping or if I'd upset the balance of things. I just knew what had to be done. But now? I sat there questioning everything. Was I keeping the peace, or erasing myself a little more each time I stayed quiet? Every smile I forced, every conversation I let slide, every email I didn't answer. It had become a habit. Politeness dressed up as love. The phone buzzed beside me. A text from Greta. "If you're ever ready to redo that will, just drop by. No pressure." I stared at it for a while, thumb hovering again. Then I stood up, went inside, changed my shoes, grabbed my purse, and drove across town. Greta's office was in a 2-story brick building just off South Hill. Her name was on the glass door, Klein Associates. Clean lettering. Solid. Like her. She greeted me with a smile and a mug of chai tea that smelled like cloves. "Didn't think you'd actually come today," she said, motioning me toward a soft chair by her desk. I didn't think I would either. We didn't start with paperwork. She didn't pull out any folders or ask for identification. She just let me sit there and sip, and the silence was kind. Not empty. At one point, I asked, "You ever been scared of making things worse?" Just by finally saying something. Greta leaned back in her chair, crossed one leg over the other, and said, "I once spent 10 years with a man who corrected the way I loaded the dishwasher. Every single night. I thought it was just a quirk. Something small. But it grew." She paused, watching me closely. By year 7, I had a knot in my stomach every time I made dinner. By year 9, I wasn't laughing at my own jokes anymore. By 10, I left. She smiled, but it wasn't smug. Just settled. I never regretted it. Not once. You know why? Because the silence wasn't saving anything. It was just making space for someone else to take over. Her words sank into me like warm water on cold skin. We talked for another half hour, about everything and nothing. When I stood up to leave, she handed me a blank document. "No rush," she said. "But if you want to start fresh, here's the paper to do it." Back home, I sat at the dining room table and laid it out in front of me. Just a piece of paper. White, unmarked. Waiting. I looked around the house. At the photo of Roland above the fireplace. At the bookshelf he built with his own hands. At the coat hook that still had Colin's high school hoodie hanging from it, untouched for years. And I thought, not with anger, but with a strange, still kind of clarity, how much of my life had been written by other people. What to say? What not to say? When to smile? When to step back? And now this paper. For once, completely mine. I reached for a pen and let it sit in my hand a moment before writing anything. Maybe it wasn't just a legal form. Maybe it was more than that. Maybe this was my turn to decide how the story ended. And maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to change the ending. About a week after I saw Greta, I got another email from Maribeth. The subject line read, "Proposed family meeting, estate planning clarification." That was her way, turn everything into a meeting, like we were colleagues and not family. Inside, she suggested we set up a formal time, her words, to establish clear expectations around the property transfer and future financial control. There was no warmth in the message. Just bullet points and attachments. Suggested timelines. Legal phrasing like beneficial ownership and administrative relief. You'd think I was a holding company instead of a mother. I didn't reply right away. Instead, I walked to the den, pulled the file drawer open, and found Roland's old will. It was written back when he first got sick, 15 years ago now. I hadn't looked at it in years. I opened it, and there it was in his handwriting at the bottom of the last page, just below the legal print. All of it belongs to Lenora. And when she's ready, she'll know who deserves it. Simple. Undeniable. I sat with that line for a long time, fingertips brushing over the ink like it might bring his voice back. Like maybe I needed his permission to do what I was already starting to decide. The next day, Greta called. "You sitting down?" she asked. Her tone was light, but I could tell something was coming. She'd been poking around, casually, nothing official. And what she found made my stomach drop, even though a part of me wasn't surprised. Turns out, a few years back, Maribeth had represented a private facility in a case involving elder clients. The issue? Questionable encouragement, some would say coercion, of older adults to pre-transfer their assets to reduce end-of-life complications. Nothing illegal. Just strategic. She's sharp, Greta said. And she knows how to sound helpful while lining everything up in her favor. I thanked her and hung up. Didn't cry. Didn't yell. I just sat on the porch for a while, listening to the wind in the trees and the sound of my own breath, which felt too loud in the silence. There it was. The line in the sand. If I said nothing, I'd be letting her do the same thing to me that she'd done to strangers who didn't know better. But if I pushed back, if I actually claimed the authority I'd quietly handed over, what would that cost me? Would Colin see me as the problem? Would I become the villain in their version of the story? The thoughts came in waves, crashing over each other. And then, somewhere between the fifth and sixth cup of tea that evening, it hit me, I had already been erased. Just slowly. Politely. What I was about to do wasn't revenge. It was a return. The next morning, I pulled the blank document Greta had given me out of the drawer. I called her office and asked if she had a slot that day. She did. By noon, we were seated across from each other again, but this time there was a folder open between us. She didn't rush me. She let me talk through every detail. I didn't leave anything to Maribeth. Not the house. Not the accounts. Not the antiques or the cabin in Idaho. Instead, I earmarked a portion for my grandson, set aside something for Colin if he ever came back on his own terms, and directed the rest towards something that mattered. The Roland Vance Fund for Dignity in Aging. A community program in his name, modest, but steady. Designed to offer legal workshops and small grants for seniors who needed help navigating life's last chapters with independence. I signed every page. Slowly. Deliberately. When we were done, Greta handed me a final copy. "You okay?" she asked, looking over the rim of her glasses. I nodded. "I am." I mailed a signed copy of the new will to the family's estate attorney on Monday morning. Then I sent a sealed copy to Colin, no note attached. I didn't feel the need to explain anything. Not yet. If he wanted answers, he knew where I lived. It didn't take long. The next evening, my phone rang just after dinner time. Colin's name flashed on the screen. I sat there a second before answering, bracing myself for either silence or shouting. But it was neither. "Mom," he started, voice tight but not angry. "I got the copy. I don't understand. You made all these changes and didn't even talk to us." I let the question hang there. He went on. "Marybeth was just trying to help. She's been looking at things from a legal perspective. Planning ahead, you know? She doesn't mean anything by it. She just wants everything to go smoothly." I could hear the strain in his voice, like he was juggling too many plates and wasn't sure which one would fall first. "I understand," I said. "But tell me something, Colin, since when does helping mean taking control? Since when does planning ahead mean planning without me?" There was a pause. Not silence, exactly, but that soft static hum of someone blinking at the truth. "She thought she was doing the right thing," he said quietly. "I know she did," I replied. "But thinking you're right doesn't make it right." We both let that sit. Then he exhaled. "I should go." I didn't stop him. "Okay. Good night, honey." That was the end of the call. 3 days later, they showed up at my door. No warning. Just the sound of a car pulling into the driveway and a knock on the door a few seconds later. I opened it to find Colin holding a manila folder and Marybeth standing beside him with that same unreadable expression she always wore when she was about to treat me like a problem to solve. She wasted no time. We thought it'd be better to talk face to face. "This is a simple document, really, just a temporary transfer of authority, in case of emergencies. It gives us the ability to act on your behalf if something sudden happens." She handed me the folder. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. Instead, I gestured for them to come in. We sat at the dining table, me at one end, them side by side at the other like partners in some quiet negotiation. I placed the folder on the table, untouched. "You keep saying you want to help," I said, looking at Marybeth, then at Colin. "But it never occurred to either of you to ask me what I want." "Not once." Marybeth folded her hands in her lap, back straight. "We're thinking long term. You're not as financially agile as you used to be." That line. I couldn't help it, I let out a short laugh. Not bitter, not loud. Just a soft, amused breath that surprised even me. "Well, that's one way to say I'm old," I said, then looked her straight in the eye. "Yes, I'm not young. My knees ache when it rains, and I forget where I put my keys sometimes. But I still know when I'm being managed. And I still know the difference between being loved and being handled." Her lips pressed into a line. Colin stayed silent. I leaned forward slightly. "You want what's best for your family. I get that. But what I've learned, what I've finally accepted, is that I am still part of this family. I'm not just someone you inherit from." They didn't respond. Marybeth looked down at the table like it offended her. Colin shifted in his seat. "I'm not signing anything," I said softly, firmly. "And just so we're clear, I've already named someone else to receive what I have. Someone who doesn't treat me like a transaction." That was it. The air in the room shifted. Heavier. More honest than it had been in years. Mary Beth stood first. "Well," she said, brushing imaginary lint from her blouse, "we tried." Colin looked at me for a long moment before following her out the door. I stood in the entryway after they left, hands at my sides, heart steady. For once, there was no shaking. No second-guessing. Just the quiet, solid weight of knowing I'd finally chosen myself. After the door closed behind them, the house settled into that kind of hush only old houses can manage, part memory, part stillness. I stood at the front window for a minute, watching their car reverse down the drive. Mary Beth didn't look back. Colin did, just once, but it was the sort of glance a man gives out of habit, not longing. I boiled water, steeped a bag of chamomile, and took my mug out to the back porch. The breeze was sharp, the kind that carried that dry, early autumn cold that whispered, "Change is coming." I wrapped the shawl tighter around my shoulders and listened to the wind move through the tall grass. There had been a time I'd have cried after something like that. Or baked. Or called someone and said, "Oh, it's fine," really, even when it wasn't. But now, I just breathed. In and out. All those years I'd bent myself into the shape of what I thought a good mother should be. The glue, the buffer, the peacekeeper. Swallowing hurt so holidays wouldn't be awkward. Pretending gratitude was enough when I felt invisible. My whole identity had become this quiet maintenance of everyone else's comfort. And still, it hadn't been enough. Later that evening, I opened my laptop to check emails, mostly out of habit. And there it was. One last message from Mary Beth. "If this is your final decision, please know that Colin and I will respect your wishes. We won't reach out again." I stared at the screen for a long while before replying. Sometimes the absence of someone is the gentlest gift they can leave behind. And I meant it. No sarcasm. No anger. Just truth. The next morning, I walked up to the attic and pulled down a dusty wooden box. Inside were years of little things, Colin's crayon drawings, birthday cards with lopsided handwriting, old family photos with dog-eared edges, even a tiny clay turtle he made me in 3rd grade. All of it tucked carefully into layers of tissue like a museum of quiet devotion. I didn't throw anything away. But I did pack it all back into the box and tie the lid shut with twine. Not to erase it, but to place it. To give it a boundary. I slid it under my bed, not to forget, but to rest it. That afternoon, I met Greta at the bookstore. We'd talked the week before about starting something, a book club for seniors who felt isolated, forgotten, left behind by family or the world. Just a few hours every month where no one would interrupt them, speak over them, or treat them like they were fading. Greta had already reserved the back room. "We'll call it the 2nd chapter," she said, handing me a flyer draft she'd made. "It's corny, but it fits." I smiled. "No, it's perfect." We spent an hour planning. Dates. Book lists. Tea selections. It felt easy, like the world had stretched just enough to make space for something good again. Driving home, I noticed how everything looked just a little brighter. Not because it was, but because I'd finally stopped looking for light in the same old places. That night, I sat by the window with a blanket and watched the sun go down behind the pines. I thought of Roland. Of Colin as a boy, all knees and questions. Of the woman I'd been, so eager to be the kind of mother who never upset anyone. And then I thought of now. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even sad, really. I was just done pretending that being quiet was the same as being kind. I took one last sip of tea, set the mug down, and leaned back in the chair. The room around me didn't feel empty anymore. I don't need to be the model mother, I said aloud, not to anyone in particular. I just need to be myself. I was switching out my winter clothes, folding sweaters into tidy piles, when I came across the scarf. It was tucked in the back of the drawer, under a wool hat I hadn't worn in years. A crooked thing, half of it loose loops, the other half so tight it barely stretched. Colin made it for me in 6th grade. Sky blue with random green stripes. He'd given it to me on Christmas morning, face red from excitement and embarrassment, and said, "I know it's kinda weird, but I did my best." I'd worn it every winter after that, at least once. Not because it was warm, though it was, but because it reminded me of who he was before the silence crept in. I held it for a moment, fingers tracing the bumps in the yarn, and realized I didn't feel the ache I expected. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even sad, not in the way I had been. Maybe it was because I'd said everything I needed to say. Done what needed doing. Maybe peace isn't something someone else hands you, it's what fills the space when you finally stop asking for permission. That week, Greta came by the house. She brought lemon muffins and updates. "Well, Marybeth's attorney called my office," she said, unwrapping a muffin with casual precision. "Wanted to know if we had any concerns about your mental clarity." I raised an eyebrow. Greta smiled. "Don't worry. I told them unless you start believing you're Amelia Earhart, we're not revisiting the documents." I laughed, and it felt like the first laugh that hadn't come out hollow in a long while. Colin hadn't called. Not once since they left that day. But I kept sending letters to my grandson. Nothing big. Just little notes with stickers, a library bookmark, or a short story I thought he might like. I didn't know if they ever gave them to him. But I sent them anyway. A thread, even if frayed. I didn't try to fix what was broken. I didn't slam the door, either. "I don't want to hate them," I told Greta one afternoon while we were trimming flyers for the book club. "I just don't want to disappear to keep things civil." She nodded. "That's not bitterness. That's dignity." A few weeks later, we hosted the first meeting of our book circle at the community center. Only 5 folks showed up. All women, all living alone. One of them had once been a teacher. Another used to run a diner down by the ferry dock. They didn't know each other. But by the end of that first hour, they were trading stories like old friends. We didn't read much that day, just a short poem someone had clipped from a church bulletin, but we did drink tea, and we laughed more than I expected. One woman, Dolores, reached for my hand as we were cleaning up. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft like cotton. "I haven't talked this much in months. I feel like I'm alive again." I blinked faster than I needed to. "You are," I said. "We all are." That night, I sat in my living room with the lights low, a soft quilt over my lap, and watched the sunlight spill across the carpet like honey. The house didn't feel lonely anymore. It felt quiet in the way a story feels after the last page, settled, not empty. I pulled out my folder of papers, wills, deeds, and plans for the Roland Vance Fund. Everything in its place. No more waiting for someone else to decide what mattered. Then I reached for a pen and opened a clean page in the back. And in my handwriting, I wrote, "To the woman who comes after me, don't ever let anyone teach you how to disappear quietly. You don't owe the world silence just to be loved." I put the pen down. I closed the folder. And I breathed. Not the way people breathe to hold back grief. The way people breathe when they know the air finally belongs to them. You know, looking back now, at 72, I don't feel bitter. Just clearer. It's a strange kind of peace that comes when you stop asking to be seen and start seeing yourself. Maybe you've been there too, doing everything to keep the pieces together, hoping it means love. But sometimes, choosing yourself isn't selfish. It's the most honest thing you can do. If any part of this story felt familiar to you, I hope it stayed with you in a good way. And if it did, well, I'd be grateful to have your company again next time.